Hello, or howdy, as Dale might say.
How all y'all doing this morning? Why don't we all introduce ourselves with our cameras on, and I'll skip that slide when we get to it. And so I'll just start by saying I'm Dale Lutz. I'm one of the two co-founders of Safe Software, and I'm excited that you're joining us today. And let's go alphabetically, which would mean I would have been first anyway, so that's good. So then we'll go over to Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a technical support specialist here at Safe Software on the FME desktop side of things. So I work in helping new users get started with the FME platform.
I guess I'm next. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna, or I guess it would have been Elizabeth, actually. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna. I'm also a desktop technical specialist here at Safe. And yeah, happy to be here today.
And yeah, hi, I'm Elizabeth, just helping on the back end here today. Really excited to be joining you all.
Great. Well, I think it's our custom to turn off our webcams now until the end. We'll see y'all at the end, but let's shut it down. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today as we explore the topic of wrangling data. So let's get ready to wrangle. Elizabeth should have had some music for me. We're going to go through 6 steps that get you to what we hope you'll find to be data quality bliss. We already did introductions. So you've met myself, Dan, and Jenna, who will be walking you through our story today, our demonstrations, which we hope will teach you a few things, open up your eyes to some possibilities and some different approaches, some ways of thinking about the work that all of you very likely are used to doing. We all work for Safe Software. We've been around for 28 years, getting to be a long time. And you can see we have lots of users and organizations worldwide trusting us to help them get the most out of their data. Now, what is it that we make at Safe? We make something we call FME, which is really an enterprise integration platform. Today, a lot of the work you're going to see is going to be going on the desktop. That's where wrangling of data often happens. But sometimes you can take the results of that wrangling or those workflows and push them up to be run automatically on FME server, either in response to a schedule, in response to a person hitting a button on a web form, in response to a file arriving in a directory. Now that FME server can be run locally on your premises somewhere on your servers, or it can be out in the cloud, either hosted in Amazon or Google or Microsoft in their infrastructures. And you even have the option of paying us to look after a lot of that for you and getting FME by the hour, FME server by the hour on FME Cloud, which is a service we provide. Lastly, we have a couple of mobile apps that can supplement your data movement. One of them lets you see data in augmented reality. That's FME AR, and there's lots of resources on that. The other one, FME Data Express, lets you run these FME server workspaces right on mobile. And in fact, the example that Dan will be showing would work very well for that. Now, we today are spending most of our time in the tabular zone and database zone down near the beginning of this graph. But over the years, the FME platform has come to support a wide range of data formats, which you can see there, starting from JS and CAD, ending up today prepping data for augmented reality or artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, today, what we have for you is really exploration of this data wrangling concept and process with demonstrations at each step. So you'll see us go through all these different items, and then at the end, we'll give you a bunch of resources if you like the look of this and want to find out more. And of course, throughout, we have time for questions and answers. Please chime in during the webinar to ask us things, and whoever isn't presenting from our group will be answering. And then at the end as well, we'll take some questions live and do a little bit of a wrap up together with you then. So I'm going to need help from my friend Elizabeth here to run this, but we wanted to just get a sense. Oh, we don't need, actually, I don't need help from you, Elizabeth. We're just going to, it's not a poll, we're just going to get you to type in the questions area. So these aren't actually questions, but type into the questions as a way of kind of getting started. What if you hadn't heard the term data wrangling, what would it mean to you? So let's see if anybody wants to give a stab at what data wrangling means. Dan, before this webinar, I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you have known what data wrangling was?
You know, it does sound like a bit of a more broad term, but I think you can piece the two terms together, you know, data and wrangling. So I think as we go on, you'll kind of see what that means throughout the webinar.
It's true. Wrangling isn't a word that we actually tend to use that often in urban life, particularly. And yeah, so I think maybe we'll, data nirvana. That's a good, that's pretty good. Roping a bunch of things together. Yeah, manipulating and understanding data in the ways you want. Getting your data under control. Turning information into data, editing your data. Yeah, collecting all the data sources. Actually, that's one good thing as a data integration platform. By the very nature of what we say we are, FME is very, very good at merging data from different places. And in fact, actually, Dan, are you or Jenna doing that today? Either of you, are you merging some data?
We're not merging any data in this webinar, but that would be another step that you could build into your data wrangling processes.
Right, a form of augmenting data. Yeah, rolling up your sleeves to wrestle with data. There's some good words there, that's for sure. Struggle with data. It feels very, essential to life. The struggle that is data. Well, a little bit more mean when they're beating uncooperative data into submission. That's a little bit more violent, but in fact, that's not often untrue. Here's a nice one: grouping data together and get it moving the same direction. That's very nice. Actually, shaping data is a good example, good one too, and it ties into the lovely shapefile, which is the most popular format in FME. So that's great. Hey, thanks everybody for these. These are really, really great definitions, and we'll now return our questions panel to its regularly scheduled use for actual questions, and we'll carry on. So just a couple of words about the definition of data wrangling. According to Wikipedia, data wrangling is the process of transforming and mapping data from one raw data form into another format so that you can make it more valuable and useful for a variety of purposes. For example, analytics, reporting, querying, and so on. In other words, turning messy data into actionable information. And that's what we're going to explore today. All those words and terms you are using are all because of these facts that are listed here. The data often is messy. It's often scattered all over in different places. It's often full of errors. It's often in different formats. We like to joke that PDF is where data goes to die, but in fact with FME you can scrape PDF to get data out, but that's kind of a sad thing. But often it's and especially in the modern world, there's a new format being invented all the time. In the spatial world, we have things riding over the horizon these days like GeoParquet and flat GeoBuff, some of these cloud native things. So it's often data is in all these different places, and you got to be ready to get at it. Excel actually is a common place too, CSV, of course, shapefiles, and the legacy program issue. We see this all the time with different types of software that had been used, no longer quite as popular, or it still is working fine, but you want to leverage that data even more somewhere else. All of these things can cause trouble. So that's why we think it's important for you to be able to make better business decisions with the data that results after you clean it up through the process of wrangling. And we hope today that you'll see how you can use our product FME to, I hope, effortlessly, or at least pretty smoothly, a lot easier than writing Python code, frankly, achieve these 6 steps that we've outlined that gets you ultimately to being able to do good decisions for your business. As we've often said at SAFE, our goal is to help all of you spend way less time fighting, wrangling your data, and much more time actually using it to get results and provide customer value. And it's going to be a journey we're going to go on today, but I'm sure you'll agree that by the end, we've managed to beat this data into a great spot. And so with that, I think we're handing off to Dan to take it away.
Great, thanks, Dale. Yeah, so before we dive into some of the bread and butter of our steps and how we're going to be wrangling our data, we just wanted to kind of go over the data set we're using. So, you might have been wondering why there's a couple cat pictures kind of scattered throughout the beginning slides. Well, that's because we're working with a lost and found animal data set from the City of Vancouver's open data portal. And we just want to make it clear that this data set, it's being intentionally mixed and blended for the purposes of this demo or these demos in this webinar, and that, this isn't the original state of the data set as it was delivered from their open data portal. So with that, we can go into our kind of overview slide of what we want to achieve with data wrangling. So our goal is going to be to discover, structure, enrich, validate, clean, and finally publish our data to an interactive pet search app. And along the way, our main obstacle is, just messy data that's inconsistent in its formatting, and the data is not really usable in its current state. So our solution is going to be using FME Desktop to perform that data wrangling, clean up our data, structure it, enrich it, validate it, and then we're finally going to use FME Server to publish our data and create that pet search app. Our result is going to be that clean wrangled data that we can also use to visualize in our FME Server app, or we can even visualize it in other ways, such as an HTML report, or maybe in a business intelligence platform. It's up to you. So that leads us into our first step, which is discovering our data. So when we're discovering our data, we want to kind of understand and gather our data. So we've gathered our data set from that City of Vancouver open data portal, and now we want to become familiar with our data. We want to ask questions such as, what do I want to do with my data? Do I want to organize my data or be able to calculate statistics with my data? Do I want to enrich my data with new information, whether that's from a new source or from within the existing data? And do I want to clean up my data to make it easier to read for the end users? So this leads us into our first demo here, where we're going to be looking at our data in FME Data Inspector. So this is a great way to get to know your data and just kind of, in this case, we're just using tabular data. So we can take a preview of all our attributes and kind of anything that looks off or that we want to fix. The first thing that I notice here is that we have inconsistent dates. We have dates in 3 different formats, it looks like. So this is something we're going to want to clean up in the future, perhaps in our structuring step. And then we also have some location data here, but in its current state, it's not really usable because the coordinates have been grouped into one single attribute. So I think we can do something down the line to maybe enrich that into kind of separate the coordinates, and then we can FME will, magically turn that into geometry. And then another thing here is we have these missing values. Any missing or null values we don't really want in our table, so we're going to validate those down the line to kind of also clean everything up within our table. Great, so go back to my slideshow, and so now we've kind of done a preview of our data in FME Data Inspector. What we discovered is that we have those date values that we want to normalize. We have those coordinate values that we want to enrich into point geometry. And we also have those null values that need to be validated. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Jenna to start with the second step.
Thanks, Dan. So Dan just walked through what we're going to do throughout this process pretty much, and I'll start with the structuring phase. So let's quickly move on to the next phase of structuring. So as Dan really went through, what we want to do is clean up those dates in our structuring step. And before we start that, let's kind of quickly look at what structuring means. So we're kind of quoting Wikipedia here. That's kind of where we got this whole inspiration of data wrangling. But Wikipedia defines data structuring to organize raw data to make it useful in the end product. So it's easier for computation and analysis along the way. So in this step, we're going to take those 3 different date values that Dan kind of went over and switch them into a single value so it's more consumable for the end user. So to do that, we're going to, first of all, just make sure our data has been read in correctly. Let's go through the visual preview to see that we indeed have 3 very messy data formats here. So what we're going to do is we recognize that there's a format here with the months spelled out. So for just ease of separating these two, I'm going to start by adding a string searcher to kind of separate that one so we can switch the dates easier. And I'll explain why I'm doing that later on. So let's add a string searcher. And I'm going to connect the ports together so that the data flows. And in here, we can use some regex. Set that it's looking for the date, look for some alphabets. And if we run this, we'll see that it separates the date values into the ones that have the month spelled out and the ones that do not have it spelled out. Going from here, we're going to use our very handy date time converter to switch all these into the same format. So we're going to bring in the first date time converter and another one. So in the first one, we're going to switch all these ones that have spelled the months out into the correct format. So we're going to connect the ports again, select it to be the date. And for this format, since it's not an ISO or FME specific format, which is why I separated out, we're going to have to manually select the correct format here. And it's very easy to do because of this preview data window under here, so it makes it easy to see what exactly we're doing. So we're starting from the correct format, and we want to output it to our desired, which is this one, the ISO date. So this is what we're expecting, and this is what we're expecting to see as well. And for the other ones, the other ISO and FME dates that are still messy, we'll again connect it to a different datetime converter and open the parameters here. And we're going to switch, do the same thing, have it select the dates. And we can, for this one, we can set it to automatically detect the FME and ISO formats since they're both FME and ISO specific formats, and have it output to the same format as the one above. Just check in the preview window here that we're going to the same format, and we'll run these two as well. And as we can see, both of these outputs are now in the same date format, which is exactly what we want. And that sort of wraps up our structuring step. So the tip and trick here is the datetime converter. It's good to note that it can automatically detect any of the FME or ISO specific datetime formats. But for any other format, like the one where we had the months spelled out, we can easily just change them out using a string detector or any other, depending on what the format is, and re-put them into the data flow. That's kind of the advantage of FME here, because you can visually see where these either rejected or outlying data sets go. So just to, again, recap, we've used the string searcher and datetime converter to structure these datetime values. The next step here is going to be to enrich our data. Like Dan mentioned earlier, we have a location-related column in our data set, but it's unusable because of the coordinates being tied together with a delimiter. So to do this, we're going to separate the coordinates and create separate lat-long tables to give geometry in the end. And according to Wikipedia, the definition to enrich would be to give data some additional value. So we'll move into the demo. To do this, we're going to be using a few attribute-related transformers here and continue with the data we started with. So let's revisit the data set here. So to look at our location, we see that it's separated by a colon, and we're going to work with that first. So to do this, I'm going to start with an attribute splitter and just connect both of these ports to run into the same attribute splitter. And we'll open up this here. And we want to split the location. We want to split by the colon. Let's trim the white space and we'll make a list from it. When we split an attribute inside FME, it's going to create a list according, and we'll have to expose that later on. So when we run this, when we click this, you won't see it in here, but if you go under columns and expose your list, you'll find that it's not exposed yet, which we will, but they've been correctly separated by the delimiter. So the next step would be to actually expose these attributes. So we're going to open the attribute exposer, connect the ports again, and in here, we're going to expose those lists. So to do that, we'll just make sure we're exposing both of those lists. And what this is going to do is, without having to go into that column, it's going to have those lists exposed. And we can see just by previewing the data, we have those values out there. But that's not as intuitive. We don't know what list 0 or list 1 would mean. So let's just rename these values so that it's more consumable. So to rename these attributes, we're going to use the attribute renamer. Again, connect those ports. For the input, we're going to select the first list, and we would want that to be our y coordinate. And we're going to select the second list and have that be our x coordinate, just for some ease. So we'll see that when we run this now, those columns have been very conveniently renamed so that it makes more sense. Perfect, we have our x and y's here. So now we'll move into giving these vertexes. So we see here now that there's no geometry yet. We have our y's and we have our x's, but FME doesn't know yet if this is a coordinate information. To do this, we're going to use our vertex creator, which is a very handy transformer that creates some point geometry. I'm going to get our vertex creator, connect those ports. And for the x value, we'll just connect the x value that we conveniently renamed. And for the y, the y. And when we run this, I must have canceled out of that. Perfect. And when we run this, we'll see that those coordinates have created some point geometry. Perfect. So we see some point geometry here, but it's odd because we're not seeing a map behind us, but that's because we haven't set a coordinate system for these points, and you can't really have anything on a map without a coordinate system, right? So conveniently, we can just take a coordinate system setter, connect those ports again, and give it a coordinate system of our liking. And perfect, we now see these points on a map. So in this step, it's just good to see how we started. We started with, I guess we'll have to start here. We started with some location points that didn't have any meaning really, and we ended with these points on a map, just in a simple, in a few 5 steps. So that kind of wraps up our enriching step. So just to recap, the transformers we used in this step was the attribute splitter, the attribute exposer, the attribute renamer, a vertex creator, and a coordinate system setter. And through these steps, we were able to create some geometry to enrich our data with some geometry. So the next step is going to be validating. And in this step, we're going to pretty much look at some of these missing or null values inside our data set, because you never want to have a messy schema where you want to go by the same schema and have some of the data filled in so that it's consistent. Like Wikipedia says, we want some consistent data across our data set, really. So to do this, we'll go back to our demo and we'll move on to our validating step. So for the validating step, what we're going to use is the null attribute mapper. Let's quickly pull that up. And what this is going to do is allow us to map some of those values correctly. So we're going to have this go through all of these values, Actually, yep, that looks right. So if an attribute is null, we're going to map it to we're going to have it be just checking if everything is right here. Yep, that looks correct. And if we run this, we're going to see that all the missing values are going to be replaced with an actual value so that it matches the schema. Oh, what's going on? Let's see here. Let's just make sure when the data was read, we read it correctly. It's convenient in FME because you can really go back to see where you messed up as well. So we can read them in as null instead. So that should actually save the whole process of why the null attribute mapper wasn't working. Perfect. Now we see that all those missing values that were here, or null values really, have been replaced with the phrase unknown, so that now that it fits the schema. So that wraps up our validating step, and we have now filled in those missing values. So just to recap, the null attribute mapper pretty much took all those null attributes that have an empty value and filled it with the unknown phrase. So the final step is going to be to clean up this data. In this step, we're going to use the attribute remover to kind of get rid of those extra columns we created along the way, like the list. And finally, we're going to fan out the data set, which is something we can do inside the writer to make sure the data is more, I guess, just more structured and more clean and more consumable. So to do that, first, we're going to start with the attribute remover to remove some of these columns here, such as the first match, which happened along one of the first transformers, and then the location that is still together. So we're going to start with the attribute remover. Connect those ports again. And we're gonna get rid of that one, that one. Yeah, looks good. Actually, we'll get rid of the list in the list to remove. Makes more sense, right? List remove. Okay, and when we run this, we're going to see that all those unwanted columns are now gone. Perfect. The columns look a lot more clean now, and we only have the columns that we want written out to our data. So to write this out, we're going to actually write it out as a shapefile. So let's write these shapefiles according to the state of, I guess, where these pets are. So we see a few states here: lost, matched, unknown. So we're going to fan out the data by what state the pet is in. So we're going to add our shapefile writer. And we're going to have this fan out. We can select it in the navigator here again after we added after we've added the actual writer. We want this to fan out by the state. So we'll select that there. And what this is going to do is write out the shapefiles into different folders according to the different states. We'll connect the ports here, run it. And I'll just pull up my Explorer here, and we'll see that each of the shapefiles was written into a separate directory for ease to access which points are actually in which state inside here. So we have 4 categories: found, lost, matched, and unknown. So if we just take a look at just 2 of the records here, the lost and matched, we can see that they're cleaned up and fanned out depending on their state. And that kind of summarizes our results here. We started with some messy data that really had no value or meaning to us. And now we've come up with some shapefiles with geometry that we can put on a map, and it's all cleaned up as well. That kind of wraps up my portion of this. Now Dan's gonna show us how we can take this and actually publish it and make some more use out of it as well.
Great, thanks, Jenna. So we're going to be moving on to the final step, which is publishing our data. So in this step, we want to prepare. So we've now prepared our data set for use downstream. That include users or for software or maybe for a web app. And in this step, our goal is to create an interactive web application where users can search for the name of their pet in that found table. So the tools we're going to be using along the way include the HTML report generator and some custom HTML. And we're also going to be using FME server to create those workspace apps. So I'm just going to go into my desktop here. And in FME Workbench, we have our source data set. And the first step here is that we've created a user parameter that will allow the user to enter the name of their pet. So I've already created this here, and we've assigned it the identifier of animal_name. And the prompt that's going to show up for the user is enter your pet's name. Our next step is going to be searching for pet names based on the user's entry. So for this, we're going to be using a tester. In the tester, we've selected the left value to be the name. So this is going to be bringing in all those names of the pets that we saw in our table. And we're going to be checking for any of those names that begin with the value that the user has entered. Our next step here is to create custom labels. What we want to be doing in our interactive web app is we're going to be feeding the user back an HTML page that will include a table of the names and all the other attributes of the pet name that they searched, as well as a map which shows where all those pets were found. In the attribute creator, we can set the attribute to be label, and I've just set up some values using some HTML. So what this is going to look like, it's going to have kind of a stack of the attributes. We're going to have the name, and then we're pulling in from the table the name of each of those pets, as well as their breed and their color. And this will become a little bit more clear once I generate that interactive HTML page a little further down the line. The next step is to create that HTML page with a table and a map. For this step, we're going to use the HTML report generator. In the HTML report generator, we're able to use a bunch of presets to actually set up our HTML. And in this case, you're working in kind of a top-down approach. So the first content here in our page is going to be the header, and then everything beneath it will kind of stack below it. So we've got the header here, which I've just set to some text that says pet search app, and I've given it a color and a header level. We've got some custom HTML here, which I won't dive into, but basically this just allows us to kind of collapse the table so that if it's has a large amount of values, then we can collapse that, and then it won't kind of take up all the space on the page. So one of our main things here is that we want to add a table. So we've set our page content to table. We're able to set a table style. We've set it to striped in this case. And we've set some of those column contents up. So the column names are what you're going to see kind of like at the top of the table for each of the columns, and then underneath will be all the column contents. And we just made sure that those match up correctly. All of these are just selected from our incoming source data set. We've got some more custom HTML, and I'll go into that a bit in the web app of what that's doing. And we have a separator here. This just helps us to divide up our HTML page. We've got another header. So below this is going to be the web map. So I decided I want to put in a header that just says pet location, just to keep things clean on our web page. And then we've got a Esri leaflet web map that we'll be adding in. So this will take that geometry from our source shapefile dataset, and it'll create points on a map. We're going to be assigning that label attribute to it that we created in our attribute creator. And we're selecting our base map to be just the regular street base map. Next, we want to use an HTML layouter. This just allows us to kind of clean up our HTML and make sure everything looks nice and spaced out. This is something that you usually would use with the HTML report generator. They're meant to be used together, so it's always something good to keep in mind. I've just chosen the grid layout here for our web page. The final step here is the HTML writer. So I've just set up a regular HTML writer, and I've set a temporary output location. Next, we want to publish our workspace to FME server. So I'm going to go ahead and click this publish button here. I've already got my server connection set up. And I'm going to make sure that we check off upload data files because we need that source data set to produce that end HTML page. I'm going to click next. I'll click yes. And we want to make sure we have that data streaming service checked off. With the data streaming service, when we run the workspace, it'll automatically feed back that HTML page to the user. Whereas if we had the data download selected, then it would just give them a download link. So I'll click publish. And now you can see we've got a direct link to our page, and this shows up in our translation log. So I'm going to click that. And you can see we have our workspace here from our run workspace window. And we can actually use this handy workspace actions tab here to create a workspace app. So this is just an easy way to take that workspace that you published to FME server and create a handy workspace app. We're going to give it the name Pet Search App. We'll give it the same name for the title. And we're going to make sure we have that correct workspace selected. We're going to have the service set to data streaming. And we want to take a look at our parameters. So this is what's going to be available in the app to the user. And we only want that one kind of search bar to be available to the user. So I'm just going to leave this and kind of clear out whatever was in there. We're going to untick these two because we don't want the user to be able to change the source shapefile. And then we can go into customize to customize a web app. So maybe we want to add a browser icon, we want to change the heading background color, or we want to add a logo or a banner. In this case, I'm going to add a nice little dogs and cats banner to our web app. And from here, everything looks good. So I'm going to click OK. And FME will automatically create that web app for us, and it'll create a handy URL. And then we can just click the URL to open up that web app. So here you can see I can search for my pet's name. I'm just going to search for Buddy since that's kind of a common pet name. And I'll click OK to run. And FME is automatically running that workspace in the background. And once it reaches that HTML writer, it's going to be feeding that straight back to us. So you can see here some of the custom HTML work, which creates this collapsible table. So if I did have more values, it would be handy to have this since you could just keep it closed so you can take a look at the map. And we also have the names of any of those pets with the name Buddy. And you can see we have the pet locations on a map. If I click on one of these markers, you'll see that that custom label will come in handy. So we have the name, the breed, and the color. So if there's multiple, buddies, we're able to differentiate between them. Great, that's our server app in action. So I'll go back to our slides here. So to recap, some tips and tricks here are that you can use the HTML report generator, and it has many presets such as the table. There's charts in there as well. You can use any of those leaflet web maps to easily create web maps, and they're also customizable. It's good to pair with the HTML layouter to create those sophisticated grid layouts, and you can also customize any of those FME server web apps with images to make it your own. So just to recap, our end result was a web app that we were able to search for our pet's name, and it produced a table and a web map. All right, I think at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Dale.
And we'll give that a try. Looks like it's working. That's a good sign. Well, thanks very much, Dan and Jenna, for walking us through the whole process from kind of a little bit tougher data file to a nice polished web app that adds value. Of course, our examples here today were all fictional, but based in some amount of truth. But I hope you all can see how you could apply these techniques to your own situations and start bringing your data to life for your organization and for your end users and clients. The end result should be that you're able to gain really useful insights when you wrangle data in manners as we're showing today. I mean, really being able to start to see these records on a map, being able to interact with them, that is more valuable than just what that raw spreadsheet was. And that was just a toy example. Your examples would be far more impactful. So again, just to summarize, FME is there to help you wrangle your data from the messy to the manageable. That's one of the sort of ad hoc use cases of FME. You do that with the various data that you're getting, do something once and you're done. Or you can use FME also to then create web apps or repeatable processes afterwards as well. But the wrangling part is a big part of what our customers are doing. And thinking about the 6 steps of data wrangling as Wikipedia defined them is very, very helpful thing to keep in mind. And lastly, FME's web interface through FME server really lets you create high value web applications with a very minimum of effort. And hope you saw or appreciated what Dan showed there today too. So the end result is that you and your organization can be far more productive and focus on the work that really matters with your newly wrangled data. So if you liked what you saw today and you're not already an FME user, go ahead and grab FME 2022.0. Our recent release is available for a trial on our website, www.safe.com. Will get you what you need. You can also upgrade to that if you have an older FME by just downloading it. You are able to keep many FMEs installed on your computer. If you want to keep the old one there and then experiment with the new one until you want to make the switch, that's totally fine as well. And apply workspaces to your own data so that you're truly ready to wrangle. We also are always interested in talking to our customers. Already today, we've received great feedback from you in the questions and answers panel. Right now, you can ask us more questions. In a second, we'll go live here and field those. But you can also reach us on our website. We have live chat there during business hours in the Vancouver area, or Pacific time zone, I guess. And lastly, you can email us at info@safe.com. Anyway, we're always anxious to talk, do proofs of concept, work alongside you to accomplish your goals. What are the options for licensing? Well, we do have subscriptions. which allow your enterprise to just use as much FME as they want. There's fixed prices for local governments, and as well, a variety of options for enterprises of all sizes. You can also buy perpetual licenses that let you just use FME on one computer, or a floating license in that way. And lastly, you can use FME via FME Cloud in the cloud. There's some other resources we wanted to mention here. So you'll be getting these slides afterwards, and I think in the follow-up email, many of these things are there. There is something called the FME, it's not the quick start. I forgot the name. That new, the FME intro 90-minute course. Elizabeth, Accelerator. There we go. That's a good one. If we can chat out the link for that to people, if you liked what you saw and you're new to FME, that's probably the best place to start, is the FME Accelerator for sure. And I'll try to remember that for the future. And as well, our webinar archive, safe.com/webinars. If you go to the archive there, there's all kinds of webinars on just about every topic you can imagine, going back all the way to 2013, which I was tweeting about earlier today, where we used a variation of this data set back then. But yeah, some of these are very useful ones that, again, when you get these slides, you can follow these links, or maybe I'll just ask Elizabeth to chat them all out, and you can make a copy of that right now while it's fresh on your mind. Okay, if you are a member, if you're one of the 20,000 or so people that's part of the FME community, you can get a badge for today's webinar, and that's the secret code there. And if you're not part of the community, that's a great place to join and watch the questions and answers go by. And there's so much information to be learned and had there for sure. And then I mentioned already the webinars. I know Elizabeth has a pretty extensive list of upcoming webinars lined up as well. So take a check on that. And we were just looking at the schedule for the next few months, and pretty excited about all that's coming there. Lots of topics to cover, because FME covers such a broad area of applications. There is a lot for us to explore in the various niches of our deep product and the deep expertise of our users. So it's pretty exciting to get to see that. If you are an FME customer, do share your feedback with us and with Gartner. I think Elizabeth will chat out that link as well. So many links to chat out. But yes, you can contribute a review, and we do definitely appreciate that as well. Oh boy, I'm almost done all these, and then we'll get into the various questions. Yes, we are gathering for the first time in 5 years. It was supposed to be in 2020, then 2021, but no, now it's 2022. At the end of August, you can come and visit us in Vancouver at the Vancouver Convention Center, where we will be hosting a gathering of FME users and learners worldwide, and should be a really great time. I've had a chance to review the user talk submissions, and we're all in for an amazing treat of people sharing how they have spun gold out of raw data straw, to quote Rumpelstiltskin, with FME. There's just such a broad range of topics, and it's going to be a learning event unlike any other, and you'll certainly leave it far more productive and able to add a lot of value for your organization. So do check it out, the Peak of Data Integration, the FME UC, coming in August. And I think with that, are we going to put our cameras back on, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that sounds good. Take a look at the question panel here.
All right. Let's see. What do we want to talk about?
Take a look, a lot of comments that came in this morning.
I think we've got a good question here from Wilfredo. What would be the best practice for inputting values on nulls in important independent variables? I guess there's a few ways you could do this in FME.
What do you think, Darren? We didn't actually introduce our question or answerer in the back. Dara's there today too. So
Hey,
thanks for helping us out.
One method I said was to use a tester and use conditional values to assign values to the nulls based on how the tester or the test conditions are set up.
Right.
It's one way.
Actually, there even are those conditionals. Let's see. I am broadcasting right now, aren't I? This is always dangerous. But I'm going to, whoops, I'll go over here, hit escape. Where's FME? Come on. There we go. That's like a little bit too big of a log window here. There's conditional values as well. So if we let's do a attribute creator, and if we pop this open, I'm going to say, like, if we knew, for example, that we had a null in A, but we wanted to use some of the other values, we can go right click here and say conditional value, and then you can start saying if the latitude is greater than 49, then set the country to Canada, else set it to United States if we were in North America. You can start to do this and assign values based on test conditions to start creating interesting values if you have to fill in the nulls. In Jenna's example, able to just go with unknown because that was all we had. But if we wanted to, you could say unknown cat or dog or something by using this type of a technique. So that these conditional values, very, very powerful. And you basically figure out, you do a tester to figure out go to null and then map to this. That would be one example for sure. Someone had asked in general about that null attribute mapper. This is a very powerful, transformer, because you can actually say, well, maybe you don't care about nulls. We just care if it's empty. That means that that it has a value, but the value is a zero length string. There's actually nothing there, or it's missing entirely, or it is null. You can handle any one of these. But if you wanted to make, somebody asked actually do the opposite of what Jenna did, was to, if the data came in and had empty or missing, to actually make it into null. And then you could say down here, make it into null, like that. Or if the attribute value was, a lot of us that are old timers remember the classic 9999. That was the map info classic for no data. And you'd had however many nines there is was however wide the field was, so you never knew exactly. So anyway, if you have nines in there, you could map to a null, or this would be the ultimate way to do nines. You'd go 9 plus in a regular expression, and I think that should mean that if I go 999, yes, it's all matching. So, but as soon as I type in A here, then that doesn't match. But anyway, you can do regular expressions, and that would be how you could also flag. Actually, a lot of times the regular expressions are extremely useful in dealing with when you're wrangling data. It's a that regular expression editor that's in FME, and I think, yeah, Jenna did you use that, Jenna, in your example to find the ones that had real like spell?
Yeah, that was in the string searcher. Some regex
Yes.
in there. Yeah.
So string searcher has that regex thing, and that's where, yeah, that's where Jenna did that. So you can always test it live here. And actually, if you're not used to regular expressions, we do have a quick reference in here that kind of gets you started. Really, really, really powerful thing to be aware of.
Yeah, I definitely think when you're working with and trying to wrangle your data, that, you know, the tester, the test filter, conditional values, and as well some regex, if you're willing to dive into that, are really powerful for just kind of splitting out your data based on, you know, certain values, or yeah, basically what you were showing there, Dale. That's really, really useful.
Yeah. The tester, again, oh yeah, the Jenna didn't need to use a tester because she used the string searcher to separate the sheep from the goats, so to speak. But that's one way. Basically, data comes in one place, and whether we match or not, we go through different places. You can do the same type of thing with a tester, and I think actually as an you can say contains regular expression as well. So you can kind of do a similar thing right in the tester. So yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, is there anything else we should talk about? Any other questions that looked interesting?
Dan Abrahamson was wondering if he is able to save his settings in a server app, kind of like the presets that you'd have in a transformer in FME desktop. Not sure if we're able to do that just yet.
I think no, like in Dan's example, that would be like how he added that cat and dog picture at the top. So I'm thinking what Dan is getting at, that if he was in the business of always making cat and dog server apps, he wouldn't have to drag that in every time. He could basically every time in FME server, when he popped into the make an app thing, it would be sitting there, which I could see if you're branding it with your company logo or something, it would just be nice if it was always there. And we will need to make sure that we let the FME server product manager people know about that idea. So Rylan, we're coming for you. That's a great one. Let's see.
Awesome.
XML. Somebody was asking if we should do an XML webinar like this. We do have some other webinars that we've done in the past about XML, but I think an XML, well, there was one where it was kind of like a challenge. We had Dean and Dawn go and talk in XML and trying different data files, but basically wrangling data that came in XML, or actually JSON is even more likely to need some wrangling. JSON data often is quite unstructured and you have to try to figure it out and work with it. So those are two great great examples of things we could do in the future.
Definitely, I'll add it to the ideas list.
So I think
Right.
we might be more than ready to wrangle. We're done wrangling.
We're done wrangling all 6 steps. Awesome. So a big thank you to our set of presenters this morning and to all of you folks at home joining us. If you do have a moment to share your feedback with us this morning, you'll have a survey launch at the end there, and we appreciate any feedback. It helps us improve the program. So with that, I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you all for joining. Bye for now.
Bye.